Snowball is an affectionate term given to a frozen world by a single species known as humans. Whenever they say there's a snowball, it's a planet that is simply covered in ice, snow, and nothing else. More often than not, nothing is alive on them, and there's no reason to hold one, as you can get liquid water anywhere. You can get it from asteroids, you can get it from belts, you can get it from your own world. Why spend the time on this frozen rock? But for some reason, humans still land on these snowballs. One in particular snowball planet sits inside dung territory, a furry species that stand at least 3 meters tall, and they do not like humans. They're very tall and broad, with the males only distinguishing themselves by having horns that seem to come down from the top of the skull down over both sides. The eldest ones even have it where the horns actually touch just a little bit before turning back out. You could see each of these a mile away, at least you would if it wasn't for the fact that their fur rapidly changes color depending on which environment. Every time they get onto a planet, it only takes a few hours before their fur to actually change color as though it's a chameleon's skin. The dung didn't care about the snowballs at all. To them, they were dead worlds, useless, until they found that humanity would land teams on these snowball planets, many times to simply conduct research in the freezing cold that would stop any release of technology, release of pathogens, and just stop it cold, pun intended. They would drill for resources through the ice, yet many times the ice was several dozen kilometers thick, if it was anything there besides ice. They would build directly into rocky outcroppings, mountains, building their own structures deep inside these mountains, and yet they seem to be content with this. However, they're still violating the territory. Humanity also learned how to use the planet's own magnetic fields to create a jamming field, meaning that if they didn't want anyone to know what was going on, you wouldn't know. And the dung always wanted to know what was going on. Mainly because once they find out what the humans have, what they're doing, the dung would go in and simply take it because that was their way. And this is how the war had actually started between the dung and humans. A dung battle group had arrived at a mining colony on a simple dead world. They demanded everything, to include the humans, to bow down and willingly put slave collars on and putting restraints on themselves so that they could be easily transported. They expected no resistance, believing that humanity, being the hairless apes they are, would simply bow down to them being so strong. The dung easily towered over them with their massive claws, massive jaws, able to lift up a human and basically snap it in half with almost just one hand. But what they received was a simple response: no. It was brutal fighting on the surface and nightmare fuel inside the caves, as without the ability to move, the dung lost many of their advantages, yet they still risk it for the resources. Since humans only arrive and stay on a planet with resources, well, this means that if there's humans, there's something to take. And now it's time to take this snowball of a planet. A solid white glow in space, as though some sort of strange incandescent bulb was just there in the void of space. As they headed towards the planet, they received some of the communications. They realized that this was going to be easy, as there was only one company. It was E Company, of some sort of unit. They had already deciphered the way that the humans' military operated, so this should be an easy group to take out. Taking out their base shouldn't be too difficult. However, because of the jamming field, they weren't able to dictate where they were going to land very well, which means many of the landing craft ended up slamming up against ice mounds, and those that did land on the snow and ice very quickly found themselves melting down into the ice and snow itself. And once the engines began to cool, the ships began to freeze right into the surface of the planet. But this didn't bother them. The massive metal door simply shoved the ice away, and they moved out. As the dung moved through the snow and ice, it didn't take more than an hour or two for their fur to become bleach white. Made them almost impossible to see if you didn't know what you were looking for, and they continued to push. Yet this would take time, as they needed to rally with everyone else, get them together so they could rush onto the humans in one big group. They found this was the best way, as human projectile weapons, especially up close, can get very interesting. Though it would take many, many hits, it would still be enough. As the humans would say, one sting of an insect's venom would hurt, but 1,000,000 will kill you. They did not want to get caught up on this, and since the dung moved so much faster, regardless of their size, they could get close and get personal. And that's exactly what they wanted. But still, they had to push through the storms, the blizzards that came in, making it difficult to see. Many times the dung simply having to hold themselves down, curling into a ball and just simply waiting as the snow ripped across their fur, just waiting for everything to be calm so they can continue. Or if they needed to, digging down into the snow a little bit to get out of the wind, and then they would continue. The only time they saw a human was every once in a while they would see one riding a strange creature, a creature that seemed to be designed specifically for this type of terrain. Was it terrestrial? Was it synthetic? They didn't know, and they didn't care. They waited for the human to get close and would simply ambush it, coming down with their massive claws, ripping the rider off, and then tearing the beast apart and feasting on its flesh. The weather kept coming in more and more. They believed that there's no way the bald primates could survive out there. Yet here one was right in front of them as they feasted on its flesh. And they wondered how it was going to be easy to take them down, as taking one only takes one simple swipe of their massive paws. Once they rallied, they finally saw the base. Many of them crawling up towards the ridgeline, realizing that it's going to be a straight shot as most of the snow is packed down. It's almost like running on the decks of their own ships. They laugh. This is going to be simple. So simple. By the time the humans realize they're going to be too close. And then they got ready, lined up, and began to charge. They did not scream. They did not curse. They simply rummaged across the landscape, many of them dropping down to all fours and running as fast as they could. And as they did, there was suddenly a muffled sound. They didn't understand, but the one very far in front, the one that wanted it, the youngest of them, that wanted blood so bad, suddenly sprayed blood all over, yelping in pain. It stood up, and then all of a sudden, there was another sound. And a half a second later, something heavy landed on the ground. The charge seemed to slow down as they slowed to look and see that this dung had just splattered across the snow. The dung was still standing for a few seconds as it was missing a head, as though the body had just seized up. And then another shot. And another. Where was it coming from? But more and more were getting shot. They didn't know what was going on. No matter which way they looked, they couldn't see anything. Where was this coming from? As one after another dung would go to the ground with a flop. In desperation, they just looked at the base and charged, suddenly realizing that the humans would emerge from the ice and snow, weapons ready right in front of them, and spray their entire combat load right into their face. Yet they did not stop, as steel brass and lead cut into them. They knew that all they had to do was get close, and that is exactly what they were going to do. It didn't matter how many dung were smeared across the ground. Their superior speed would get them to their target. However, they didn't expect what came next. More humans seemed to emerge, this time not from the trench line like those that had just tried to cut them down, but it seems as though all within their formation, humans seemed to burst up out of the ice, raising up huge weapons large enough that many of the dung simply moved out of the way, rolled, ducked, dove for whatever cover they thought might be there just out of straight instinct, as they know what these type of weapons can do. And just as the boomsticks open up, the dung realized that they had just run into a trap. As they moved around left and right, trying to figure out what was going on, still trying to push forward, it seems as though there were sudden groans of agony, but these were not actual groans of pain, but as though their muscles were straining, and the humans seemed to rise out of the ground as though the dead were coming to life, raise their weapon and firing as well. It didn't matter if they were that close. They just continued to shoot, even as the dung started swinging, slashing, able to rip the humans clean apart with one swipe. The humans just kept fighting. They kept fighting, climbing out of their icy prisons as though cold does not bother them at all. Seeing that they're completely outmaneuvered and outmatched, many of the dung towards the back realize that there is no chance of them making the front of this base, so they simply turn and run, running back to their ships and trying to get them to leave. However, the ships are now frozen into the ice. They try to raise the weapon systems to try and fight off what might be coming, but the weapons systems are frozen. Everything's frozen. The storms had started to pack the ice all the way around, so thick that the mechanisms would not allow the defense cannons to turn, would not allow them to raise, would not even allow them to come out of their moorings. So all they could do was send out a distress call and hope. Hope that their engines would hold out to keep them warm enough that the exterior cold would not turn their ship into a frozen tomb. Hope that their food storage would remain. Hope that their water reclamation system would continue to function. And hope that before they all died, slow and agonizing, that their own would actually show up to get them. Yet every single time they looked out the viewports, they worried that something else was out there, waiting for them. As they peered out into the storm, they could see the slight silhouette of something. They could see figures, just a flash as they ran by. These humans were out there. They were moving, trying to get in position, as though they were testing the system, looking for a way, looking for weaknesses, looking for anything. Inside the snow and ice, the humans became the ghosts. They became what the dung actually fear. The humans were not cold, as cold didn't seem to bother them anyway. No, they were just patient. They knew the dung were stuck in the ice and could only hope for rescue if it can arrive. They knew that all they had to do was wait. Because if the dung did not get any retrieval, what waits for them in the ice will surely find its way inside eventually. And when it does, it is not the cold they need to fear. It is what waits out there with a frozen heart. Hello, everybody. This is Syntax. Thank you for joining me today on this very quick, mostly off-the-cuff story. And before I go, I need to say that today's winner is MTF Guard with Douglas Scarborough and Donut coming in second and third. And I also need to send out some ginormous thank yous to the supporters of this channel, and they are Prozac and Pancakes, Brian Kemp, Guardian Sage, SS Demon, MTF Guard, Erica Gem, Steve Ewing, and Joseph Blosh. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntext, punching out.